Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold walked calmly through the halls of Columbine High School, but beneath their quiet footsteps, they carried a storm of destruction that would soon change everything. They weren't just students anymore. They were ticking time bombs, moving with deadly purpose toward a moment the world would never forget. Their names would soon be etched into history, not for who they were, but for what they were about to unleash. April 20th, 1999 began like any other day at Columbine High School. Nestled in the quiet suburb of Littleton, Colorado, the sky was clear, the morning air crisp with the promise of spring. Students moved through the halls, greeting friends, sharing weekend stories and preparing for another routine school day. Teachers readied their lessons, unaware that soon their classrooms would be gripped by terror. Parents dropped off their children with no clue that some would never see them. Again, at first glance, everything seemed perfectly normal. The parking lot slowly filled with cars, laughter echoed through the corridors, and the familiar bell rang to signal the start of the school day. But beneath this peaceful exterior, something sinister was already in motion. Two students, masked by their quiet appearances, had been planning a catastrophic attack for months, right under everyone's noses. No one suspected that the boys who blended into the background were hiding a terrible secret. These students, driven by rage and isolation, had been secretly gathering weapons, collecting ammunition and building homemade bombs they had created. A detailed plan designed to unleash destruction on a level the country had never seen inside a school. Their goal wasn't just to harm a few, it was to cause mass casualties, making their names infamous forever. They had carefully chosen the date, knowing it would catch everyone off guard. They started their day like any other, blending into the student crowd. Beneath their long coats, they concealed firearms and explosives. Calmly, they arrived at school as if it were any other Tuesday, their faces showing no sign of the storm. They were about to unleash at around 11:10 a.m., while their classmates were focused on tests and lunch plans. The two slipped away to set their deadly trap. They entered the cafeteria, one of the busiest areas of the school, and placed two large propane bombs hidden in duffel bags near the tables. The devices were set to explode shortly after the lunch bell, at the peak of the cafeteria's crowd. If the bombs worked, they would ignite a powerful blast capable of destroying the entire room, killing hundreds instantly. After setting the timers, they calmly walked away, positioning themselves outside the school where they could watch the chaos unfold. They expected the cafeteria to erupt in flames, with terrified survivors fleeing straight into their line of fire. But the plan didn't go as expected. Unbeknownst to them, the bombs failed to detonate. The timers clicked away silently, but the devices malfunctioned. Their massive plot, which they had spent months crafting, crumbled in an instant. But instead of giving up, they switched to their backup plan. Now, instead of an explosion, they would rely on their guns. They readied themselves outside the school, surrounded by students enjoying their lunch break in the warm sun. In their minds, the moment had come to take their revenge, to become the center of a dark story that would soon spread across the entire world. As the seconds ticked away, the normalcy of the morning began to dissolve, about to be replaced by an unthinkable nightmare. The school, once a place of learning and laughter, stood on the edge of becoming a site of unimaginable tragedy. At exactly 11:19 a.m., the attack began. The two students, now armed with rifles, shotguns, and pistols, opened fire near the west entrance of the school, where many students sat eating lunch or chatting in the sunshine. The first shots rang out, like cracks of thunder, shattering the calm atmosphere instantly. Within seconds, the peaceful courtyard was transformed into a scene of terror and confusion. Students nearby froze in shock, unsure of what was happening. Some thought it was a cruel prank or perhaps fireworks, but as the gunmen continued to fire, the truth became terrifyingly clear. Chaos erupted as students screamed and scrambled for cover, dropping their lunches and personal belongings as they ran for their lives. Some ducked behind cars in the parking lot, while others sprinted towards the nearest doors, desperate to find safety inside. The attackers showed no hesitation. Their every move appeared calculated as they fired at random, targeting anyone in sight. The sound of gunshots echoed through the air, growing louder and more frequent. Inside the school, the noise reached classrooms where students and teachers paused, confused and alarmed at first. Many thought it was just another lockdown drill or a senior prank gone too far. But soon, the chilling reality began to settle. In dot as panic spread outside, the gunmen approached the main doors of the school. They fired through windows and at anyone near the entrances, sending shattered glass flying in every direction. Inside, students scattered in every direction, some diving into classrooms and others fleeing down hallways. Teachers began locking doors, turning off lights, and pushing students into hiding spots behind desks and cabinets, trying desperately to shield them from the danger approaching. Within minutes, police arrived on the scene after receiving multiple frantic 911 calls, but they were met with immediate gunfire from inside the school. Unsure of how many shooters were involved or where they were located, officers were forced to stay back, unable to immediately enter the building under such heavy threat. Meanwhile, the shooters roamed through the hallways, firing at random and throwing homemade explosives that sent smoke and debris through the air. Most of the bombs either failed to explode or caused only small fires, but the gunfire alone was enough to trap hundreds of students and staff in fear. The hallways were filled with the sounds of screams, alarms, and gunshots, creating a terrifying and disorienting environment. Outside, terrified parents and neighbors gathered, watching helplessly as news helicopters began circling overhead. The terrifying images broadcast live showed students climbing out of windows and fleeing in every direction. Many were bleeding and crying, their faces pale with shock. Inside the school, confusion continued to spread. No one knew exactly where the shooters were or how many people had been hurt. In some parts of the school, students were huddled silently in locked classrooms, praying to remain unseen. In others, students were running for their lives, unsure if they were heading toward safety or deeper into danger. The attack was far from over, and with every passing minute, the situation grew more desperate. The library, located near the center of Columbine High School, was filled with students when the gunmen approached. It was just after 11:30 a.m. Many students had rushed there upon hearing the first shots, believing it would be a safe place to hide. The large room, lined with bookshelves and filled with computers, became a trap as the attackers entered. As soon as they stepped inside, the sound of gunfire exploded once again. The attackers showed no hesitation. Within moments, panic swept across the room. Students screamed and scrambled to hide under tables, behind bookshelves, or anywhere they could fit. The space that had once been a place of quiet learning was now filled with terror and chaos. The shooters moved through the library with chilling precision, targeting students who were trapped and unable to escape. They roamed between the rows of tables and shelves, firing relentlessly. Some students were shot where they hid, while others were wounded as they attempted to crawl away. The scene became a nightmare of fear and desperation. In one corner of the library, smoke filled the air as one of the shooters ignited a small bomb, though it caused only minor damage. Still, the noise and smoke added to the confusion and panic inside the room. The attackers seemed to thrive on the chaos. moving deliberately through the space as students sobbed and pleaded silently, hoping not to be noticed. In total, 10 students were killed in the library within minutes, making it the deadliest part of the entire attack. Many others were injured, while some miraculously managed to survive by playing dead or remaining completely still. Those who lived through the horror later described the terrifying quiet between gunshots, the eerie moments when they could hear the attackers laughing or shouting as they continued their rampage. Outside the library, the situation remained just as dire. Police officers, still unsure of how many attackers were inside or where they were located, stayed outside, trying to assess the scene without worsening the danger for those still trapped inside the school. Meanwhile, terrified parents and news crews gathered, watching in shock as images of the unfolding tragedy filled television screens across the country. Inside the library, after the brutal violence, a haunting silence began to fall. The shooters left the room, leaving behind the bodies of their victims and a group of traumatized survivors who barely dared to move. Many continued to hide, unsure if the attackers were truly gone or would return. For those in the library, every second felt like an eternity. The fear of being discovered kept them frozen in place, too afraid to even whisper. The once familiar space had become a place of unimaginable horror, and the trauma of those moments would leave deep scars that would last for the rest of their lives. As the shooters moved away from the library, their deadly rampage was not yet finished. The nightmare inside Columbine High School was still far from over, and the lives of many more students and families were about to be changed forever. After leaving the library, the two attackers wandered through the now silent halls of Columbine High School. The chaos they had unleashed had driven most students and teachers into hiding. Classrooms remained locked, lights switched off, and students crouched low to the ground, frozen in fear. The air was thick with smoke and the lingering scent of gunfire. Fire alarms continued to blare throughout the building, mixing with distant cries and muffled footsteps. The shooters appeared to have no clear direction anymore. Their carefully laid plan had already fallen apart. The bombs they had placed in the cafeteria had failed to detonate, and their original scheme for maximum destruction had crumbled. Despite this, they continued roaming the building, firing occasionally but with less intensity than before. It was as though their energy was beginning to fade, and the reality of the situation was setting in. Around 12 p.m., they briefly returned to the cafeteria, perhaps in a last attempt to trigger the failed explosives. They were seen on surveillance footage walking among the empty tables and debris. They tried setting off additional bombs and fired shots at the propane tanks they had placed earlier, but nothing ignited. The cafeteria, which was supposed to be the main site of destruction, remained intact despite their efforts. Their movements became increasingly aimless. Some witnesses later described hearing them talking to themselves, their words a mix of frustration and resignation. They fired a few more shots in the hallways, but there were no more major confrontations. The school had mostly emptied, and the remaining students were hidden away or had already escaped. By 12:08 p.m., the shooters returned to the library, the scene of their earlier massacre. The room was still filled with terrified survivors, many of whom remained hidden under tables, afraid to move or even breathe loudly. The attackers walked to a back corner of the library, near the windows shattered from earlier gunfire. Without warning, the two shooters ended their lives, bringing their rampage to a sudden and chilling close. Their final moments were marked by a sudden quiet as the sounds of gunfire abruptly ceased. The entire school fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the continuing fire alarms and the faint sobs of those who had survived the nightmare. Outside, police and SWAT teams were still preparing to enter, unaware that the attackers were already dead. For many agonizing minutes, No one inside or outside knew for certain whether the threat had ended. Officers cautiously moved through the school, clearing room after room, finding students and teachers hiding in closets, storage rooms, and locked classrooms. The full scale of the tragedy slowly came into focus. Injured students were carried out, many bleeding and in shock. Parents clung to their children in emotional reunions outside the school, while others waited anxiously for news that would never come. As the building was finally secured, the world watched in disbelief, struggling to comprehend the horror that had just taken place inside Columbine High School. In the days that followed the Columbine High School tragedy, the quiet suburb of Littleton became the center of worldwide attention. News crews from across the country crowded outside the school, their cameras capturing every tearful vigil, every police statement, and every image of grieving families. Shock and sorrow rippled through the nation as the full details of the attack began to emerge. People struggled to understand how such violence could happen in a place that seemed so safe and ordinary. Investigators worked tirelessly, combing through the school, analyzing every corner, every shell casing, and every piece of evidence left behind. Soon, they discovered an overwhelming amount of disturbing material. In the homes of the attackers, police found journals, videotapes, and computer files that revealed a deeply disturbing glimpse into their minds. The two had documented their plans for months. They had filmed themselves discussing their intentions, practicing with weapons, and even mapping out the layout of the school. These recordings were filled with hatred, anger, and a twisted desire for infamy. The attackers talked about their desire to cause as much destruction as possible, and expressed their belief that no one had understood them. Their writings detailed a long history of resentment toward classmates, teachers, and society as a whole. They spoke about their fascination with violent movies and weapons, adding fuel to the growing debate about the influence of media. The discoveries sent shockwaves through the community and the entire country. Questions quickly rose about whether there had been missed warning signs. Reports surfaced of their history of bullying, isolation, and troubling behavior. Some classmates had even noticed strange remarks and dark drawings, but no one had believed they were capable of something so devastating. Debates began on television, in newspapers, and in homes across America. Many blamed violent video games, aggressive music, and movies that glorified violence. Others pointed to the easy access to firearms and the lack of security in schools. Parents, educators, and lawmakers all demanded answers, but the questions often led to more confusion. In response to the tragedy, schools across the country began making changes. New security measures were introduced, including surveillance cameras, locked doors, and increased police presence. Programs focused on anti-bullying and mental health awareness became more common as communities searched for ways to prevent future attacks. Despite all the investigations and changes, many people felt that the true reasons behind the attack were still hard to grasp. The sheer brutality and coldness of the attack left a lasting scar on the national consciousness. Columbine became more than just the name of a school. It became a symbol of the deep, hidden problems facing young people and society at large. Years later, the school was remodeled, but the memories remained. Memorials were built to honor the victims, offering a place for families and visitors to grieve and reflect. Survivors carried the emotional weight with them, many speaking out to help others heal. The tragedy at Columbine High School serves as a painful reminder of how quickly everything can change and how the darkest acts can emerge from unexpected places. It is a story of heartbreak, of questions without clear answers, and of the urgent need to understand and address the warning signs before it's too late.